ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you'll join us in fostering a positive environment here today to ensure a safe and welcoming space for all. As always, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors and partners of today's event. Without their support, the work of the Chamber and the programs we put on would not be possible. So thank you to our title sponsor, Manulife. With its Canadian headquarters in Waterloo, Manulife has more than 3,000 employees working in the region. Manulife's been a long-standing supporter of the Chamber and played a strong role in building the community. Like the Chamber and so many others in this community, Manulife has been a vocal supporter of better infrastructure and transit, including the expansion of GO service. Manulife's Red Day program matches community donations and provided significant funding to St. Mary's Hospital in support of cardiac care and women's health. I'd like to thank Manulife for its continued support of these Leaders series that allows us to engage with leaders on issues that are important not only to business, but to the entire community in Waterloo region. And thank you to our silver sponsor, Activa. Tony's here from Activa. Our bronze sponsors, the Christian Labour Association of Canada and Cornerstone Association of Realtors. Our community partners today, the Grand Valley Construction Association, North Guide, and the Waterloo Region Home Builders Association. And to our production sponsor, Goodco Productions. And thanks again to our host venue for the day, the Crown Plaza KW, for their hospitality in hosting us today. Please join me in thanking these incredible partners and sponsors. I'd like to welcome everyone here. We do have some dignitaries with us today, so I want to just introduce, I think, MPP Catherine Fife is here from Waterloo. There's Catherine. I don't see Barry and Dorothy were going to be here, but they have the joy of being at Regional Council talking about budgets today, so they're not here. But we do have from Kitchener Council, Councillors Dave Schneider and Debbie Chapman joining with us. I think Waterloo Councillor Diane Freeman. I don't see Scott Hamilton from Cambridge, although he's registered, so he may be joining us a little late. So thank you for joining us today. And from our Board of Directors of the Greater KW Chamber, Stephanie Soulis from Little Mushroom Catering, thank you for joining us. I now have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker. Marit Stiles is the leader of the Ontario NDP and served as the leader of the official opposition in the Legislative Assembly in the 43rd Parliament. Marit came to Ontario from Newfoundland to study and stayed because of what Ontario offered, the opportunity to build a good life. Marit has dedicated her life to public service and helping make better life for people across Ontario. She worked for cabinet ministers in the first Ontario NDP government, has led health policy development, and negotiated to defend Canadian workers and jobs as Director of Policy and Bargaining at ACTRA. Marit stepped up to serve as a trustee on the Toronto District School Board, the largest school board in North America, and has first elected MPP for Davenport and Toronto in 2018. She lives in Toronto with her partner and 2 daughters. From winning good deals for workers to standing up for stronger public schools and as an MPP and now fighting to restore the promise of Ontario as the leader of the NDP, she's running to be Premier of the province of Ontario. Please join me in welcoming Marit to the stage.
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction.
I'm just jealous that you don't need glasses. Maybe I'll start. We've got a series of questions which we can get to, but I think maybe the opportunity for some opening remarks. We're a couple of weeks into a campaign. Maybe some initial thoughts about what you're seeing across the province.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's really helpful. Actually, and thank you so much for hosting this series. I just think it's wonderful. I will say I've noticed a bit of a pattern in local debates. Certainly, not everybody's showing up, and but I know, like I will say, I think. these opportunities to come together. I know we planned this, I think, before the election, actually, but it is really important to hear from us and to be able to address sort of local, regional issues. I think it's a real pleasure and a great opportunity. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here in the region again. I am, and I'm very grateful to chambers as well across the province. I'll tell you what I will say is, as I travel around the province and have been doing so for the last 2 years as the leader of the opposition, I meet with the chambers as I go around the province, and so I will say, I mean, everywhere I go, I hear some of the same issues, very similar issues. I appreciate the work that the Ontario Chamber has done, especially the Mind the Gap report. I think was really important work. So I've seen a lot of similar patterns and trends, but definitely what I'm seeing around the province right now, and I know we're going to talk about this, is people were not expecting an election. So they're just kind of starting to wake up to the idea that an election is underway. And people are really struggling. I think lots of people out there in every corner of this province are struggling. Struggling with the cost of living, struggling to find healthcare when and where they need it, struggling to get support for their kids in schools. These are some of the things I hear everywhere I go. And I think as well, this threat of tariffs that, again, I think we're going to talk about a bit more deeply, but it comes at a time when people are already feeling pretty vulnerable. And our communities are very weak and very vulnerable right now. And so I think that while I don't think that election was necessary, I think we're going to talk about that, I do think that there's an opportunity here to make some significant change in the province, so I really welcome it.
Well, that does lead us into maybe my first question, and I guess, the calling of elections when it's not on the set election date has its own, the Premier has to answer for why he's gone early. I guess from the business perspective, the uncertainty that on the federal scene with the Prime Minister holding on as long as he did and not really feeling like he had a mandate created uncertainty. And so, calling this election in the face of that, when there was a leadership void at the federal level, at least that's what many in business felt, and I think across the country, so we can debate whether there's a political opportunism to this election, but is there not a reason, given those uncertainties, the political uncertainties, the economic uncertainties that Donald Trump is creating, is this not a good opportunity to talk about what Ontario needs to do to be ready to compete in those?
I don't know. I wouldn't trade, personally, if it was me in that position, I wouldn't trade the stability of having a majority government in power in this moment with the need to have a conversation about tariffs and what our solutions are. I think what was needed in this moment, actually I think it's exactly the opposite. I think with the uncertainty and the instability at the federal level, it was more important than ever that we maintain some stability here. So I don't buy that. I don't buy it from the Premier at all. I know as well that many of us have been hearing there was whispers of an early election for some time now. So I think he saw an opportunity and he wants to, pull one. I'm going to be honest. I think he wants to pull one over on the people of Ontario and use the tariff threat as an excuse for that. But again, from my perspective, okay, here we are. We're in it. We're ready. Catherine and I and our team of candidates, many are sitting here with us today, actually. Thank you for joining us. We are going to see this as an opportunity to address that. I just don't think it's going to go quite the way that Mr. Ford had hoped it would, because I don't think that the questions that people out there that I'm hearing are grappling with right now are, yes, they're afraid of the tariff threat and what it could mean, and certainly in some sectors and for our economy, but they're also they're really, really struggling with the issues I mentioned, and housing, and the cost of housing, and groceries, etc. And so the thought of of a tariff threat and what that would mean for our economy is just on top of everything else. So for me, it's like I always think about it, it's like, what is the straw that breaks the camel's back? And unfortunately, it's going to take a lot less straws right now because people are already weak and they can't take much more. And we should not have ever been put in this position. We should not be as vulnerable as we are right now as an economy, as a people, but we are. And so yes, this is an opportunity to make a change. Elections matter and your vote matters.
Okay, so let's talk about tariffs though, because I think whatever has been happening, and I find it fascinating that two Fridays ago, they announced 25% tariffs on everything, and 10% that Donald Trump did. And that could be an existential threat for Ontario's economy, particularly, things that you think like the auto sector. That would grind to a halt overnight. Hundreds of thousands of people could be affected. So I'm interested in, to me, you've got someone who's unbalanced would be kind to Donald Trump, but he's there, and he's there for 4 years. If you're premier and you're leading Ontario, how do you kind of respond to the threat of tariffs and preparing for the threat, even though they may never come into place, but it's creating instability in investment, in people worried about their jobs, and that can have a bad effect on the economy itself.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think that's, I'll just say that, absolutely. So I'll start by saying I really believe we need a strong, united national approach to tariffs. That is what we need. Premiers off freelancing, undermining each other and undermining each other's province, coming up with, plans on the back of the napkin is not going to help us. It will divide us and it will make us weaker, without question. So I really am a big believer of that Team Canada united approach. I also think that some of the opening throws that Mr. Ford made in the early days of all of this were not the right direction to go in, I'll be honest. I mean, yes, there are things we can do that seem to appease whatever Mr. Trump's real issues are here, like if they are border security, there's things we can do. But, once we start talking about Fortress AmCam or, kicking Mexico out, to me the problem is we are always going to need the United States. They are important trade partners. We are important allies. But at the same time, we have other friends out there in the democratic world. And who knows and who can predict what his game is at the end of the day. But I do know he will pick us off one by one. So let's find friends. Let's also explore other supply chains. Let's talk about building up our Canadian and our Ontario production. Let's bring into play really strong Buy Ontario directives. This is something Catherine Fife has been a great leader on for many years. There's so much more that we can do. And to your point about the future, it's not just today. We can't predict where Donald Trump is going with this. I think that is true. I don't think anybody can really predict what his end game is. But we have seen this game before. We saw it in 2018. In 2018, I was reminded by steelworkers yesterday when I went to Hamilton to talk about the impact of the steel tariffs. They said, look, in 2018, we got out of that situation. But Doug Ford stood to the side and wouldn't have anything to do with it, and it was the federal government that took the lead. Now, maybe that was the right thing to do, but let's not play games here. We need a strong Canadian approach. And the other thing is we have to tariff-proof our economy. And so that's when I start talking about how we look at our supply chains. Our absolutely overwhelming reliance on the United States and those trade relationships. I think that going even further and deeper into that may be the wrong approach. When you are dealing, and I'll tell you, I'm going to give you a little analogy. I don't share this very often, but somebody I know who was part of a lot of big rounds of NAFTA and other negotiations with the United States said to me when these threats first started coming, he said, Pierre Elliott Trudeau said something like, if you sleep, somebody will know this, if you sleep with an elephant, we are sleeping with the elephant, we are the mouse. Be careful, just be a little careful when they roll over on you. But when you're sleeping with a rabid elephant, it might be a good idea to get a little bit further out of the bed. And I think that's kind of where we're at. We have to protect ourselves. And that means we have to protect our population. And we are weak right now. Our population will not be able to take much. We can't take, much more cost increases. We can't take that hit on our economy. And that's what worries me right now. My focus right now would be not only on trying to work something out with the United States and be part of that Team Canada approach, but it will also be how can we support people here in our communities so they are less vulnerable to this attack.
That leads to, and this is something that I think is there's the tariff threat and the immediacy of it, but it brings into focus something that we've been talking about for 30 or 40 years in Canada, which is, and the Ontario Chamber has led on this, the Canadian Chamber, local chambers have been saying, we need to get rid of interprovincial trade barriers. And people say, well, this is just taxes. No, it's regulation on business, movement of goods. There are a whole host of things where we don't trade freely inside of Canada, yet we have free trade agreements with 50 countries around the world. So I guess the question becomes, that's going to take political capital, because there will be industry and people in Ontario saying, hey, we're going to have to change. Why don't other provinces change, or protection of some industries here? And I guess the question will always be, if you're premier of the province of Ontario after this election, will you put political capital behind leading the rest of the provinces to say 3 to 4% GDP growth simply by getting rid of those is the kind of thing where it keeps money here, it keeps jobs and wealth here in Canada? Is that something you're going to put political capital
absolutely.
behind?
I mean, absolutely. It's time, and I think I would also say this is a good moment to be talking about that, because I think Canadians, I think Ontarians understand that at this moment, and we see people making choices every day right now. You're going to the grocery store and they're saying, I'm not buying that American product. I want to buy something from BC instead, or I want to buy something from here in Ontario. I want to support a Buy Ontario program here, but I also think that Canadians, Ontarians are looking to make those better choices and support our country. I think, let's be clear, it's not just an economic threat, although it is a serious economic threat. It is also a threat to our sovereignty that we're being hit with. So this is actually, I think, an important moment when a premier could expend some political capital, have those conversations around the country. And I think actually Ontarians and Canadians are looking to us to do that.
I want to just go on something else you said. I mean, during COVID, we discovered that we couldn't rely on the supply chains we had from Asia and the United States, because they were cutting off and keeping, safety supplies and all kinds of other things. Scarcity was a thing during COVID. We do have free trade agreements with 50 other countries around the world, including and specifically the European Union. Is that an area of putting focus of saying Canada or Ontario should lead in saying in helping business and helping communities be talking about saying we'll always be reliant to a large degree on the United States, but how do we lessen it so that we're not, as you say, so we're at risk of these types of trade threats? And whether it's Donald Trump, this is never going back to the Ronald Reagan days of trade. Right, yeah. And so we're going to be dealing with this. Is putting some time and effort into saying European markets, other Asian markets that we have free trade agreements with?
Absolutely. Again, this is something that our government at the federal level should also be taking a leadership role in. But here in Ontario, the Ontario government has a role to play. We send our delegations all over the world, but we need to be really looking very carefully at that supply chain. And I hear you, because I think there were many lessons from the pandemic. One of the significant ones was the precarity of that and our reliance in certain markets and certain trade partners. So, that's exactly what I mean. We have friends out there, and they're getting hit too. And if they aren't now, they will be. And we need to make sure that we are preparing and working very closely with Ontario business, industry, and workers to make sure that we can, again, I use the word tariff-proof our future. I think we are in a vulnerable place right now, and the wrong approach is to go deeper down that road.
Okay, let's move on, and this is it's a big issue in this region. 12 years ago, Schneider's left and went to Hamilton. We lost 1,200 jobs and supply chain jobs on top of that. What it ultimately produced is the city and the regions and their economic development officers coming together, because the business community said, we couldn't compete. We didn't have a large piece of land to offer Schneider's to keep production here and to grow the way they wanted to. We brought it, I think there was a lot of pressure from the business community saying we need to be doing this in a coordinated, concerted effort, and that produced the Waterloo Economic Development Corporation, which has been very successful in landing investment here in the community. I'm setting this up because I want there to be no mistake. 12 years ago, I remember Greg DeRocher from the Cambridge Chamber and myself saying we need to have large land assembled so that we can compete, and we don't compete against ourselves. We solve that problem, but we still don't have assembled land for the next anchor employer. Part of this is we're going to have 300,000 more people in probably the next 20 years. Roughly speaking, that's 100,000 jobs. As much as I'm a big supporter of small business is not going to create 100,000 jobs. There needs to be anchor employers. And anchor employers like Toyota that have roughly 10,000 jobs in this community, but their supply chain is 27,000 jobs. So there's a huge necessity for that. And the reason I do this is there is a contentious debate now about land assembly in Wilmot Township. And I think this is it's important for me to put the context. This is not a provincial, it may be a provincial priority, but it is most certainly a local business necessity, and we've been talking about this for 12 years. So I guess the question is, where do you stand on land assembly? Because is it the process? Is it the piece of property we're talking about? It's important for us to understand who is going to do the land assembly if it's not meant to be done locally, because business can't do it. That is, it needs to be supported and sustained and driven by local government. So where do we stand on land assembly? Because we know we're going to need those jobs to be a successful community of 1 million people within 20 years.
Well, I mean, first of all, let me tell you this. One of the commitments that I've made as Premier, our government would, within the first 100 days, bring in a collaborative process for situations like this that ensures transparency and a willing host. And this is where what I want to get to is our concern is there have to be willing hosts and there has to be transparency around the conversations like this. Situations like this. So we absolutely need the industry, we need the investment, we need the land to support industry, employers, jobs here in the region. We also need the agricultural sector to be strong and healthy. We need to make sure that the future farmers have a reason to continue to invest in farming, and that farming is a business and a very important and crucial part of our economy and a crucial employer. And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think we can do more than one thing at the same time. So I think the real question here, or the real answer here maybe, is in terms of process, having the provincial government play a role in ensuring a collaborative process that allows for transparency and requires, of course, a willing host.
That's helpful, because if process is the issue, then we have to have that discussion. The willing host part is, I think the community is certainly people understand we need to have jobs. So we will be eager to be at the table along with those that are not in support of aggregating land, because the community needs the jobs if you're going to have have a successful community. Because if we don't have the jobs, we're going to have a community that is not able to sustain itself. So I think we'll if you're Premier, we'll be eager to sit at the table and talk about what that process looks like.
I guess I would say, it's obvious that we need the industry, we need the investment, no question. But I do think that when you see as many people as show up for a conversation about this as have been showing up, you have a sense that the community is not there, not all of it. So the region may be. So I think part of this, what I hear when I listen to what people are telling me in that situation, and I have been on the ground in the community a lot, is I hear a concern about transparency. I hear a concern about a lack of knowledge of what's really taking place here. I think people want to be part of the conversation and have access to the same information.
Okay, we've talked about large employers, but small business is the backbone. It is not the only, but it is the backbone of communities. Our Chamber of Commerce, 1,650 members, probably 70% have less than 20 employees. But that is the same across community after community after community. So small business is the, you know, the engine of growth for the province. So I guess the question always comes up is, how would a government you lead support small business to grow the economy and create the jobs that are required in communities right across the province?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I would say, you know, when and again, I want to give a shout out to the Ontario Chamber for the Mind the Gap report, because what I see when I'm out talking to small, medium-sized businesses around the province are similar issues coming up again and again. And we talked about it with your members right before this a little bit. I thought it was really telling. You know, for example, not being able to put a bid in on procurement from at the Ontario government level, like the red tape involved, the barriers involved. These are things, you know, this government has an actual minister in charge of red tape reduction, and yet this problem seems to me like it's gotten worse, not better. So we need that Ontario procurement, made in Ontario procurement directive in place that's looking as well very specifically about how we use the power of our government dollars, these are our government taxpayer dollars, to invest in this way through procurement in small, medium-sized enterprises, new businesses, innovative businesses, things like that. And how do we make the rules and the regulations work for them and make it easier? That's one thing. But I would say the other big thing I'll just jump to, and I mean, there's a million barriers I know. I hear it from insurance rates to all kinds of things. But I do know that for many of our smaller businesses in particular have been on the front line of the mental health and addiction crisis in our communities. And so I think we have to be talking about how we're actually going to make sure that those folks in our communities get the support they need, so that it isn't our small businesses on the front line who are having to be constantly dealing with those issues. And that means building homes for people. It means putting real resources into our communities to address mental health and addiction challenges, treating those issues as healthcare crises that they are. These are the kinds of things I want to talk about with folks. But I also think it's a lot of the same issues that all Ontarians are dealing with. You know, it's the lack of affordable housing for your employees. It's the fact that, you know, you can't find people to come and work in your community because there's nowhere to live that they can afford, and they can't get a family doctor. These continue to be the same challenges. I mean, small, medium-sized enterprises are experiencing that just like everybody else.
It's like you're going right ahead of all the questions we're going to get to on housing and other. No, I'm just kidding. But I would say if you can solve the Carabelk secret of how to do government procurement to allow small business to
that's
be
the
part
woman
of
who's going to fix this.
Yeah, because it is unfair that you have to be a large business with a huge department to navigate procurement in the province of Ontario, because there's many of the small businesses that are in this chamber who could just as well provide the services and the things that the province of Ontario needs to do. So
absolutely. And you know what better way, honestly, directly, you know, to support Ontario business, to support small, medium-sized businesses, use our own dollars to do it, you know, and I think that is, like, if you look at other jurisdictions that are really successful that way, that's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Healthcare, huge issue, and I think everyone is seized with the crisis of the lack of family physicians or primary care. It's more broad than that for primary care. Our chamber has been doing, on behalf of the community, as a community initiative for over 25 years, family physician recruitment. What we know is that we have to have a different plan to new doctors are practicing in different ways. They're not going to take the same patient loads. They're not going to do the same type of put the same hours in. They're just not anymore. And primary care is seen as not a thing that new clinicians and physicians want to be part of. So but it needs to be addressed, because we're going to talk, and after this, we're going to talk about a new hospital. What we can't create is a new hospital and a new emergency room and having people filled in it.
Have it empty.
Having
Healthcare workers.
having healthcare workers, but also that people go there because they don't have primary care and fill emergency rooms. So what's the plan? What is your plan to try and address that? Is it a combination of family doctors, nurse case practitioners? What's the plan that people can get primary care, which is the gateway to healthcare?
Right. So first of all, let me just say, I started to do some work in healthcare policy about 20 plus years ago. I was working in that field a little bit and looking at a lot of these issues, these same issues. We've been talking about the doctor shortage, the impending crisis that was going to be coming for almost 30 years. And yet, I would say, government after government after government have failed to truly address it. And you're absolutely right. What I hear from family physicians, first of all the time, is let me do the work that I want to do, which is to see patients. And so one of the things that we are proposing, and we've actually introduced this in the legislature, but the Conservative government voted it down, was to start to remove the administrative paperwork burden on family doctors, on family physicians, from their desks so that they can actually see more patients, which is something they've directly asked for, and we would like to respond. And some of that is just providing them with additional support and connecting them to teams of other workers as well who can assist them with that. So that would right away free up physicians to see some more patients, which would be good. This is something that helps immediately. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're bringing in a healthcare guarantee because we have to stop messing around about this. This is going to require expanding medical school placements. It's going to require more residencies. But again, unless you actually make the reality of what it is to be a family physician a little bit easier that way, you're not going to recruit people in, have medical students choose primary care, choose family practice. So you have to sort of take away some of those barriers. Well, the other thing we are finding, the research shows, is that many of those folks would prefer to work in a team environment. So we're going to create more of those integrated team models all across the province. And we have a plan in place to hire those physicians and get those physicians in place within 4 years. I will tell you another critical piece of that plan is to speed up the foreign trained professionals credentialing, which I just want to say last year the provincial government had a target of 50 physicians they were going to get speed up the credentials for. They couldn't even make that target. This, to me, is not a government that is taking this issue seriously enough. And I will quote the Minister of Health, who said to us directly that the family physician shortage in Ontario is not a major concern. She said that just last year. Unacceptable, absolutely it's a crisis and it has to be addressed, but it's not going to be addressed by doctors alone. So we need to also address the general healthcare resource and retention crisis we have. Nurses are burning out. Healthcare workers in home care and long-term care are burning out. They feel disrespected by this government who took them to court to suppress their wages. If we don't do something about bringing back respect to those workers, which will mean also bringing up their pay in some cases. I'm looking to my friend at CLAC who raised this issue when it relates to home care. We are never going to address the crisis in hallway health care, in emergency rooms, and as you said, that is making sure that, ultimately, what is healthcare? Healthcare is people providing healthcare. We need those healthcare workers to be strong and to be supported, and that will require investment.
And what we heard earlier in the roundtable is there's got to be some disruption in a lot of things, like nurse case practitioners, and in different parts of the community or province, it's going to look different about what that looks like, but we have to have that. Listen, I want to go to
Can I just say one thing? One thing I'm finding, and I've started to call it, when I first came to Ontario 30 plus years ago from Newfoundland, it was hard sometimes in northern communities to find a family doctor back then. They were still struggling to find specialists and things and connect. Today, Every community in this province, 2.5 million Ontarians do not have a family doctor. It is the Hunger Games out there, right? Communities competing, as you know, all too well, with big, small towns in rural Ontario competing with big cities to attract the same people. It is absurd and ridiculous, and it requires leadership at the provincial level.
Okay, we've been going through, and about over a year ago, the two hospitals, St. Mary's General Hospital and Grand River Hospital, announced a joint merger, a collaborative joint merger. Many of us, for many years, had said that made all kinds of sense. There was no reason to have two separate hospitals. They've been sharing chief of staff and many of the internal, so it made all kinds of sense. We know, and what we're told, promised by the hospitals, but it's obvious to see you're going to have improved patient care, increased efficiencies, strengthened community health, but it still requires, to get it through the hurdles, it's got to go through the province. And I guess what we're doing while we have you here, we're doing this with all the leaders that are spending time with us, is will we have your support to get that final approval of the planned merger together so they can get on to next steps, which I think is coming up in March of this year, March or April. So should you become Premier, will you support the merger of the hospitals?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you for the question. You have the plan. You know what your community needs. My priority is making sure that every Ontarian has the health care they need when and where they need it. And, you know, this plan is a good plan. It has everybody's backing. You need a provincial partner.
Okay, so let's move on to the new hospital build. The community has come forward, said here they've got a site in the north campus of University of Waterloo. The community's agreed with that. We haven't had a new hospital built in 60 years. We've had some renovations along the way, but we haven't had a new hospital. And since we might have been 200,000 people the last time one was built, we're going to be 1 million. So the hospitals have come together, they got a redevelopment plan. I guess to get a little into the weeds, part of this is there are so many plans, because every community has some version of healthcare needs across the province for new infrastructure. But we're at the point where we need approval for stage 1.3 planning with the Ontario Infrastructure Ontario for phases 1A and 1B. All by way of saying we need the next phase of funding to get to the next step so we can be ready to get the final approval to get the building going. Because we know it's going to take 10 years. Once the approval is done, it's going to take 10 years to get it open.
No, sorry, absolutely. And a fast-growing region like this, you've got to have this ready. And what I've seen happen in so many cases across the province is years, and as you said, it can take 10 years, right? So years and years to get a hospital built, and by the time you get there, you need another one. I think of like regions like Brampton, where they've been looking for another hospital forever. The reality is we are a province that has the resources, the ability, and a government with enough money, frankly, to be able to make these things happen, and communities ready to raise the money to do a lot of this, because let's face it, you're raising the money. We need a person, and I will say, not only do I say yes to this, but I think we really have to look very deeply at the process that's in place. It is taking far too long for these things to get approved, and it's leaving opportunity behind for Ontario, right? We cannot grow, we cannot continue, we're not going to find the industry that wants to invest here. We're not going to be able to continue to build our economy and become that tariff-proof, strong economy if we can't get this kind of thing done.
Well, I say amen to that, because it takes far too long to get these decisions. But one of the things that the hospital does, and you're right, the community's set to come in behind and raise the $500 to $750 million that the community needs to raise for it. But we know it's going to create future prosperity and jobs for the community. We know we can do this in a fiscally responsible way, and we know that it's going to create better patient outcomes. And part of it is innovation is part of what this region is about, and we're involving the tech community and how to do things more efficiently, better more patient-centric, better outcomes, which can be things that can be translated to other communities, can be exported to other communities who are going through this. So ultimately, we get to that next stage. what we're looking for is in your first budget or close to it, are you going to support the build of this new hospital?
Yes.
Good. We can move on here. Okay, let's talk about housing. And we had a lot of discussion at our session with some of our folks before. As we go to $1 million, roughly speaking, and this is like someone could argue and say, is it 40 or 60,000 or 70,000 or 80,000? Roughly speaking, we need 70,000 housing units in the next 20 years of all descriptions. So it could be multi-res, it could be missing middle housing, it could be ground oriented. We need them all if we're gonna grow by 300,000 and have adequate, affordable housing for everyone, whatever that means for them. So there are challenges and we talked about some of those this morning, from skilled trades to actually do the building, from planning approval delays, from the development charges cost that goes on. In some cases, you could add, in many communities, at least 100,000. Some communities, 200,000 right on top of the cost of a home is all the permits and fees, etc. And whether that all works or is it makes them unaffordable for people. They're out of reach for people. So I guess the question is, your elected premier, how will you lead to ensure that the public sector approvals are sped up, the regulations and fees don't price people out of the market, and that we work collaboratively? And I think we heard from Tony and somebody said we got to be disruptive about how we actually make things happen so that we have more supply to make them more affordable for folks. What's the plan? Like how will you approach what is a crisis of not having enough homes for the people that live here?
Right. Well, I'll start by saying I have to say to all of the municipalities and partners here in the region, it is great to see the kind of creativity that is coming through, right? Like there have been a lot of creative solutions and ideas, and I see that in other regions as well, all over the province. And I'm going to be very honest here. I think this is probably it's hard because healthcare is up there, but the greatest failure of this current Conservative government. And I am, of course, the leader of the opposition, so you expect me to be a critic of some of these things. But I will say there were times when I was more hopeful, right? I thought, okay, we have a really big crisis here and we have to do something serious. And like you said, maybe a bit disruptive. And we had a panel that made significant recommendations, the government's own task force, and we are seeing fewer builds now. Starts are at the lowest in 70 years. We are down below almost every other province. Like, this is a massive failure, and it didn't need to be like this. So I will say a few things. One is, I think we need to go back to some of the recommendations that have been made, that are out there, that were agreed upon, that I think all parties and everybody can agree to. We need to be able to loosen things up a bit so that we can build the kind of housing we need. Fourplexes as of right, etc. All of the density around transit. Some of this you're already moving forward on, but so I think there is some room there for sure. And I will say as well, I meet with developers. I met with a small developer who has an amazing project in mind to build, triplexes. He's got everything ready to go. You get to a point, you just can't move it forward anymore. The red tape, yes, the regulation can sometimes be cumbersome. The fees attached can be cumbersome. But I actually think that what we need as well, and one of the things that I think will kickstart us moving forward to provide more different kinds of solutions for people, is we have to get the province of Ontario back in the business of building housing. We are the only province in Canada that no longer does this. It stopped back in the mid-90s and we never got back to it. And so by that I mean we have to have a provincial government that is actively working with nonprofits, with municipalities, and yes, with local builders to actually build truly affordable, deeply affordable, permanently affordable rental and other forms of housing. Like, it's essential. I'll tell you, that to me is essential because people, for whatever reason and whatever needs they have, will look to those solutions. Right now, what our research shows us is that most young people can never imagine, buying a home isn't even in the realm of possibility, and that goes in every corner of this province for a lot of people out there. So they also need to be able to afford their rent and save a little bit before they could even begin to think about buying a home. So I think it's having different options. It's understanding that the problem is deep and diverse. I want to give a nod out to somebody in the earlier session we had who talked about seniors. And this is another thing I'm seeing. So I want to give you a good example. There's there remains some co-op, rent geared to income kinds of housing in this province, a lot of it geared towards seniors, but there's not enough. There are massive waiting lists. There are many seniors who would actually like to downsize and have something affordable like that in a community of seniors. They cannot do it right now. We could build that housing right now and free up additional housing that, they can then move on and downsize. There's so many things that have to come into play, but those are just a couple of the things that we're talking about. But our housing platform is going to be very rich. We've released lots of pieces of it. It's on our website already, but there will be more coming.
Okay, let's move on. The LRT here in Waterloo Region has been an undeniable success, not only as a transit vehicle of moving people, but the investment along the corridor has surpassed $5 million, much of it in multi-res units. The first phase was funded, we paid, the residents of Waterloo Region paid a third of the cost of the system. We did it in 2 stages. And really what we have right now is half a system. We need this to be finished to South Cambridge if we're ever going to have any attempt at getting the 70,000 homes that we just talked about, because there certainly will be some multi-res along that corridor from South Kitchener or from Fairway Park Mall to South Cambridge. So I guess the question for us is we paid a third of the cost last time. Most transit projects now are shared 50-50 between the province and the feds. Will the government you lead fully fund the 50% between the province and the federal government to finish our LRT?
Yes, we will. Phase 2, we are fully committed. It is absolutely essential to the economic growth and continued growth of this region, and our candidates and our MPP, Catherine Fife, have made that very, very clear to me. Yeah.
Good. We just want to warm it up because when the ask comes, we're
Can I
sure.
add something else to that? Because I do also, I may not get a chance to, I don't know what you're going to ask me next, but I do want to make sure that folks here know as well about our new deal for municipalities that we proposed, because part of that is actually uploading 50% of operating for all transit from all municipalities around the province. That's hugely significant, and it has been a long time coming when you consider that all of that stuff was downloaded onto municipalities back in the 90s, late 90s, and government after government have talked about this and never gone through with it, so it's significant.
And you did read my mind, because that was a question, but I'll maybe put the twist this way. So that's great that you're going to have that relationship between the municipalities and the province, because transit is one of those big ticket items. But there's a role for the federal government to play too. So as Premier going to them and say, the new deal for municipalities, everyone talks about it, but it hasn't happened. And when it does, it's green tax and it's some of the gas tax. What's the new model for a modern Canada that's going to be able to make sure that communities where things are delivered, the provinces where the services primarily, healthcare, education, are delivered, and the federal government's got all the taxing power?
Yeah, well, okay, so first of all, I would say, yes, absolutely. We have to have a conversation with the federal government about Ontario, about particularly, I would say, Southern Ontario, and, the sheer enormity of the contribution we make as a province to our overall economy in Canada. But I can't actually say that without adding this, which is, Ontario is actually a have-not province right now. We receive transfer payments. It used to be, when I came here from Newfoundland was a have-not province. Ontario is now that province. That is how poorly our government has mismanaged Ontario, our finances, and our economy. So, I want to negotiate something new. I want to go to them. I want to talk about how we can have a real federal partner as well at the municipal level too. But I got to tell you, this is the state that we have been left in. If this is Ontario after 7 years of this government. I don't mince words. To me, the fact that this province, Ontario, which when I was growing up was absolutely the economic engine of Canada, absolutely the place that you came to for opportunity. You came here because you'd get a family doctor and a good school for your kids, and if you needed healthcare, you'd go to an excellent hospital. That is not Ontario today. And so it is a bit of a harder sell than I think it used to be.
Okay, my staff are waving at me wildly from the back because we're coming up to time here. So I got one more question, and then I'm just going to wrap up right as we sit here. You've been a community leader for a long time in public policy, school board, in now the legislature. And some of us that have run for office before, it's a very public job interview over four weeks. Why do you believe the voters should choose you to be the next premier of the province of Ontario?
Well, I think because it's time for some new ideas. It's time for some new ideas, some new energy. It is time for a government that is there working for people, not for just your friends and the insiders that happen to be in on the deal. And I think I say that, and I want Ontario to, and I know Ontario can be so much better. And I think I'm the right person because I have a team of amazing MPPs already elected from every corner of this province that are many of them experts in their field, community leaders. They come from all sectors. I don't see this as a job that is just done by one person, obviously. I see this as about delivering a government that will work for people. And I think this is the moment, I have to say. I think this is the moment. When Doug Ford called that election a couple of weeks ago, my first thought was, are you kidding me? It's -20 and we're going to go put up signs in snowbanks? What? But you know what else I thought? I thought, gosh, if there was ever a moment where we need to shake things up in the province of Ontario, it's right now. We cannot afford another 4 years of this. We absolutely cannot. Things will just keep getting worse, not better, and we will continue to be vulnerable. Very vulnerable. Our communities are vulnerable. We need to change things in a big way, and we need a government that's going to be focused on people and on their side.
Marit, just hang tight. I'm just going to close this up. And I want to thank you for joining us on Between the Ferns here at the...
It does feel a little bit like that.
Between the Ferns. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule during this campaign to be with us and talk about the issues important. Once again, just as we wrap up, I'd like to thank today's sponsors, our title sponsor, Manulife, our silver sponsor, Activa, bronze sponsors, the Christian Labour Association of Canada and Cornerstone Association of Realtors, our community partners, the Grand Valley Construction Association, Northgard, and the Waterloo Region Home Builders Association. Our production sponsor today, Goodco Productions, and our hosts here at Crown Plaza KW. And of course, a special thanks to all of you attending in person today and watching online for your continued support in making and helping these events possible. We have our last event with the Provincial Leaders Series this Thursday, the 13th. For full details and to register, please visit our website at greaterkwchamber.com. Hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.